This is Robert Amira Webb, and this is the 10th installment of QuikTest Education. This is the last one, and I encourage you to think through these things carefully. This particular one is dealing with treatment protocols for suicidal ideations. Again, in your results, you're going to find it down at the bottom. And just a note, every 38 seconds someone attempts suicide, every 15 minutes someone succeeds. Big issue for you as a counselor. If you counsel very long at all, you're going to run into suicidal ideations, elevated personal safety scores. This is an extremely discouraging, shocking statistic from the Department or the National Institutes of Health. 17.7% of people who were chronically depressed over a long period of time, followed for 40 to 45 or 40 to 44 year period of time, 17.7% of them committed suicide. That's almost 1 out of 5. That's shocking for you as a therapist. When you use that questionnaire that we talked about last time, if somebody says, I've been depressed like this on and off for 10 years, 17.7 should come into your head. I got one that's 1 out of 5 potential, almost 1 out of 5 that could potentially harm themselves. Other significant mood disorders, 11.1, bipolar, 11.4. 1 out of 10 people with bipolar or other mood disorders end up committing suicide. 20.9 million people, according to NIH, are suffering with chronic depression. This is an epidemic, and you are on the front lines of that epidemic. Do not feel that if you bring this topic up, the issue of self-harm, that you're going to cause it. And no, if the person's thinking it, you're not going to push them over the edge unless you say something really stupid. But no, actually talking about it lets the client get it out, and maybe that's enough to vent any desire to do it. You're not going to harm someone by talking about this elevated score. Let me see here. I'm just trying to go down through this rather quickly, get down to the important stuff at the bottom. These are the 7 items here that occur inside QuikTest that we use for factors associated with personal safety. No close friends. A person's isolated themselves. Anger is secret. Again, isolation. They're not going to talk about things that really bother them. They're going to let it build up inside. Stressed out. Stress is such an important factor in suicide. Can't cope with life. Don't think about the future. Those two are kind of tied together. If a person has no future, then they're thinking about dying. They're not thinking about what they're going to do in a year or 2 years or 5 years. They might not have much of a vision of the future past a week or a couple days. When you see that, it's probably because they can't cope with life much more. Life is collapsing in on them. Take a lot of risks. Sometimes risk is suicide in and of itself. Driving drunk, driving recklessly, endangering themselves at work, doing stupid things, construction people climbing on the outside of a building without their safety line on, all that kind of stuff. Sometimes this is very suppressed activity, this risk-taking. And probably the number one indicator that the person may commit suicide is they thought about suicide in the past. This is not a new thing for them. And most cases, most adults 30, 40 years old, if you find them suicidal, you will eventually get out of them that they in fact have felt this way in the past. This is recurring. Common thoughts and feelings: self-hatred, hopelessness, pushing away friends and family, staying locked up in their room, isolating themselves, not belonging, being a burden, all those kind of things. Basically cutting themselves off, making themselves dead while they're still alive. Here's some other indicators that increase suicide. Again, previous suicide attempts or ideations, disrupted sleep patterns, haven't slept in 3 days, anxiety, agitation, tolerance of mundane things, rage, risk-taking, we already talked about that. Substance use, overdose, is a good way for a person to accidentally commit suicide. This one's kind of scary here. A person feels this resolve, like the whole world is figured out. And the reason that happens is because deep inside they say, okay, well, this is all over. And so all of this other stuff clears up. And you think, okay, this person's out of the woods. They're suddenly feeling better. Suicidal hints and ideations, drop these little hints. Maybe it'd be better if I wasn't around. What are you going to do next week when I'm not here? That kind of stuff. Are you ready to come to my funeral? All this kind of stuff is a potential indication that something is seriously wrong. Mental disorders, we're not going to go too much there. Any kind of mental disorder can be part of this. Borderline personality, antisocial personality was listed on a list somewhere. I'm not too sure about that because those people are usually the only people that exist in the world as far as their little world is concerned. Borderline, yes, I can see major depressive disorder, bipolar. All of those could increase the risk. Just be aware of the fact that any other comorbid mental disorder could in fact increase the risk of suicide or suicidal ideations. Again, here's another list. You can look through that. Responsible assessment of the client. I want to just mention here, when you get a client who is elevated above 110 or 115 on QuikTest, it's your responsibility to retest them the next time they come in. Because that score is elevated. A person has a personal safety score of 120, and you don't test them again the next time they come in, you're being irresponsible. Because that score may be 130 now. And you may be looking at a situation that is dire. The test is free to use. Continue to use it until all other scores are in a safe range. And I even test them a couple times beyond that. A person who has an extremely high depression or personal safety score, I would always use addiction dependency scale with it. These things go hand in hand. Be surprised what you find. Hospitalization. Your state, maybe even your county, will have rules about who can hospitalize who under what conditions. Now, any normal citizen can call the police and say, I don't think mom's safe. I think mom gonna hurt herself. And upon that recommendation and interview, paramedics may take that person to the hospital. There are some states, and I can tell you Oregon is one of them, or at least Portland is one of them, that have particular police officers who are trained in spotting these kind of things, and they will show up if there is a call. I know because I worked there, and Usually the recommendation of somebody with a PhD in psychology, the paramedics will take that person right away, and they're going to go to the hospital, and a psychiatrist is going to examine that person in the hospital and probably contact the therapist who sent the person there to determine whether or not they need to be put on a 72-hour hold. In Portland, though, these police made that determination, and sometimes I didn't agree with them. But you need to check with your own rules and regulations. Just know this: a person whom you believe will harm themselves, when they leave your office, is your responsibility to contact authorities, police, ambulance, whatever. Don't let that sit on you, because they walk out of your office and commit suicide, and you kind of had this feeling it was going to happen, and you didn't contact somebody. You're going to end up holding the bag on this, and you don't want that to happen. And even worse, you do not want this person to be dead. Your whole goal is to try to help them. So there's two reasons why you need to make that call. And then we'll go down here, tag onto that. You need to document yourself. Anytime anybody has a QuikTest score that's elevated, you must document. There is no reason not to do a note. No note, no session. And the question then is, what were you doing with that person in your office? You were not treating them because you didn't write a note. There was no counseling session that went on. That's how it's going to come out in court. And you're not going to get around that. You're not going to wiggle out of that. Now, you should be having anybody sign a confidentiality agreement when they come into counseling. There are some in the documentation section in the Merit Web Project. It shows you how to do it. Just suggestions, do it your own way, however you do it. But we outline in those documents the specifics of when confidentiality is going to happen for the client and when it is not going to happen. Anytime that a client is endangering themselves or is threatening to endanger someone else, confidentiality just went out the window. That needs to be completely spelled out to the person before you ever counsel them one time. Confidentiality is something that we strongly recommend, strongly encourage that it will happen, except in cases where somebody's going to get hurt. And in those cases, confidentiality must be broken. I'm sorry. I'm still getting over a cold. Confidentiality must be broken in those cases. It has its limits. You can look over this section. It's important, but read through it on the legal issues. You need to identify a problem. You need to have a treatment plan for anybody you're counseling. You don't, you're opening yourself up for trouble. You have to take notes. I've already discussed the questionnaire. Look over some of these issues here. Again, stinking thinking, distorted thinking, illogical, dysfunctional thinking, Substance abuse greatly enhances suicidal success. Family environment may also be involved. The last thing, some people do this, find it helpful, that is to make a life contract. The person who may be contemplating suicide, you get a contract with them that says basically, you're not going to do this. You're going to make these steps. You're going to call somebody. You're going to call an ambulance. You're going to do this. You're going to do that. And that will sometimes cause a person to rethink. Maybe not. But that contract basically says, here are the things you're going to do instead of committing suicide. Quite honestly, I've never done it. I tried it once. Found it to be relatively ineffective. The most effective issue is probably a significant amount of depression going on here. Education. How do they cut down the depression? How do they resolve that depressed feeling? Depression is almost always present in a suicide, unless there's psychosis. Go over the depression stuff again and look at some of the ways to break that. This is the end of QuikTest Education, and encourage you to take the exam when it's available.